back in the 1980s, I got my degree in biology from Oregon State University, and then went in the early 90s to Stanford and worked in the departments there, two different departments actually, and learned a lot about odd things about the science in biology and the physics. This all started getting me thinking down a different line of like, hey, what is going on with EMFs, this sort of stuff, but not really tinkering in it too much back in the day, more of like an exposure to it, because Stanford, of course, is got some crazy stuff going on with it. Like even back in the 40s and 50s, like some of the crazy experiments they had with remote viewing, things like this, right? So I started hearing about like all this odd science, at Stanford back in the day. Then I left Stanford in 1996 and was going to work at UCLA at the biology departments down there. And it turned out that a headhunter contacted me and saw all of my like analytical, detailed, database driven stuff from what I did at Stanford. Because if you think of the timeline, I was at Stanford when the internet was developed. So all the new systems that came online then, like I learned them firsthand at Stanford, and especially like an environmental health and safety department there. So they kind of like snatched me up into the video game industry from that point on. So I have all this like elaborate like scientific background, but I'm like, okay, well, I'm going into the video game industry. My God, it pays ×3 and it's fun. And it's also my hobby. Like I did a lot of hobby stuff with it, in my youth. So fast forward a little bit. I started working in video games, actually at Squaresoft that does like Final Fantasy, like all this stuff. And for the last 26 years, I've still been doing video games on and off, but as you can tell, I turned my video game stuff into a profession, but I turned my hobby back into biology and back into, just like keeping into the sciences, having friends that were also into the sciences, just I kept up with the biology, kept up with PubMed, kept up with reading all the scientific papers and seeing what all the design was. So an event happened to me because I got into video games in like right around the year 2000. I started going blind. My eyes were, I'd come to a screen like this in front of me, and I get all these spots appearing in my vision. And being a scientist as I was, I'm like, okay, I'm going to investigate what is happening to my retinas, what's happening in my eye. Well, it turned out I didn't really get my answer until about the year 2010, about 10 years after, really, until I put all the pieces together. And what it ended up being is like, again, a biophysics issue with light frequencies hitting my retinas, destroying different tissue types in the retinal tissue, and the mirror part of the eye called the RPE, which is the endo, like it's like a really long, I call it the RPE. It's the retinoid ethylene pigmosa. That's the name of it. It's like the mirror part of your eye that reflects the light. Those particular cells were like breaking down, and I realized that there was a cascade of a lot of like deeper biology stuff, like with glutamate processes, with blood pressure, with the light frequencies, certain light frequencies hit it. Of course, we all know now today, like blue light can harm your retinal cells. Like it's like what Pam's wearing right now. She's got some blue blockers on. If I would have known that in the year 2000, I probably would have minimized the damage, but it wouldn't have created me to maybe not go blind because of other problems with just how the cell receptors were interacting with like glutamate, which I had a higher glutamate diet, which is like MSG. So I figured that out in the first year, and around the year 2000, figured out that taurine, which is another amino acid your liver makes, which cats actually don't make it, which is an interesting thing. They rely on the diet to get their taurine source. Babies require taurine, for instance, for their neurological development. And I started taking taurine in the year 2000 and realizing, wait a minute, I'm not getting these visual spots anymore because it actually competes with glutamate on the receptors. So that was like a hack for me back like for the 10 years after I figured out how not to go blind and not to have these retinal spots form and block my vision. I like for a good 2 or 3 months, I had a big like quarter size like blockage in one of my eyes. So I had like astigmatism. I couldn't like work in video games in front of a computer because I'd have to like work like this. So I wasn't looking through this weird blocked vision, right? So once I figured out the glutamate side of it, it was almost like a kind of a band-aid to the frequency element to it. Then I finally realized in 2010, after starting, I got into Dr. Jack Kruz's website way early. I was still looking into the science of just like all the really odd and sciences that related to this, because I knew frequencies played a part, but I didn't know really how it did until I really started getting into that side of the details. I read all the works from Robert Becker's works on electromagnetic frequencies in your body, how your body's frequencies work, through biophotons, just a lot of like really odd science that's been out there and kind of hidden like since the 1950s and 60s, but also what's also come about in the last like 20 years in the development of like electrobiology, I guess you could say. You know, back in 2000, I think it was 2011, 2010, the Flexner report came out, and the Flexner report was the first push by the major bankers to get medicine consolidated by the doctors at the time. So like the doctors had more free reign. They would like do more house visit appointments. The doctors could tinker with like Leyden jars and like all this like electric stuff to see if using electromagnetism might actually help the body in certain ways or might hinder the body processes in certain ways. And they didn't really have the knowledge at the time because the electromagnetic energy in the body wasn't established until Becker's works in the 1950s. So they were like tinkering around with all this stuff, but the Flexner report banned them. They said, you cannot use this electricity or EMF or anything to try to like help your patients. So that's what kind of has gotten like EMFs out of the biology picture, and why it's really not taught in schools is that back in the early 1900s, they like banned doctors from using this stuff. And now today, like in the last 20 years, there's this whole like new science called photobiomodulation. And a lot of this has to do with pulsing the right kind of light into your bloodstream to cure and reduce your inflammation levels and up your actual like processes in your mitochondria, up ramp your mitochondria, make them stronger, make them burn more energy all the time. This is what red light therapy essentially is. So like red light therapy is a very good way of thinking about like how photobiomodulation works. And all this knowledge kind of trickled in the last 10 years. And I've been like in that group, like with different doctors and different people, especially in the last 10 years, really the last 12 years. So for my story is, even though I'm doing video games, I'm still like finding ways to live in a very healthy way for my biology, but also for the environment I put my body in. Kind of like a fish in a fish tank, you want a clean fish tank. So I like mitigate and figure out like my EMF in my area on all sides of my electromagnetic influences coming into my environments. Number one, you want to like mitigate your sleep space, because your sleep space is, your 8-9 hours in your sleep space every day. And that's when your body's really regenerating, if it's allowed to. So you want that first and primary, your focus. And then after that, where else you spend time. Oh, hi, welcome back. So yeah, I was talking about getting into EMFs a little bit. So I mitigate like my sleep spaces, my work spaces, all this. And I created a business in 2000, I think it was 2019. I created a business for EMFs, for EMF mitigation. And I bought over the past years, like for the last 12 years, I've bought different meters to measure my environments, and then really thought, I know all this stuff so well. I'm almost like a building biologist. I pretty much am. And I started talking with other building biologists that also had a business for EMF mitigation, and realized that my knowledge was like just equal to their knowledge, and befriended a lot of guys and have been doing EMF kind of a business from about 2019 to around 2021-ish, 2022. I have been into like 800 or 900 different homes, with all my meters, checking for electric fields, for magnetic fields, for broad sweeping magnetic fields, for stray voltage, which is a kind of a subsection of the electric field, dirty electricity in homes, and of course, all the wireless sources that are going on today, and finding ways to make kind of like feng shui a space for the actual like environment. So that's one service I offer. I can do a lot of it online, where I can look and talk through what's going on maybe in your space, and then talk about ways you could fix things without me needing to actually go into your house if I'm not local to your area, and think about, okay, here's ways we can set it up for a lower EMF impact. This also includes lighting systems. Like any light frequency, whether it's visible or invisible, I can go in and give you really good knowledge about how to set it up for a lower EMF into your body every day. And then also bring in the good frequencies, like figure out how to bring in more sunlight into the home, and get your circadian rhythm really cycling well. Circadian rhythm, I should talk about just briefly. It's like the #1 gateway to all of your health. If you mess up your circadian rhythm over a course of a longer period of time, like several months, if you mess it up, everything about your health will suffer. So that's like a very strong thing we need to do, is get your circadian rhythm in a good rhythm, so your body has time to heal, time to regenerate, time to repair, and it will do things for your body. Like, for instance, if somebody's trying to lose body fat, right? If your circadian rhythm's off, your body won't try to lose that fat. It's going to have a harder time doing it. It's like the #1 staple of a lot of people in the ketogenic community, where they'll tell you, like, if you do a ketogenic diet and you're looking to, like, build muscle and shave off fat, like if your circadian rhythm isn't down that well, and you're not like thinking about some of the nuances that we might not be thinking about, then it's just going to be so rough for you to like build that muscle and lose that fat. So yeah, so there's a whole field that's come about in the last 5 years called chronobiology, which is literally the circadian rhythm. And it came about because the Nobel Prize was given out in 2016 for circadian rhythm, how much more powerful it is to our biology, but we really don't think of it that way. In 2013, if I recall, there was a study in Sweden when there was like hundreds of thousands of nurses that all came down, like a really high percentage of nurses coming down with breast cancer. And they looked at their patterns, and they looked at their circadian rhythm, and they realized the nurses that were just under their fluorescent lights, like that worked the night shift, the graveyard shift, that's the majority of the nurses that are coming down with breast cancer specifically. So different light frequencies can actually trigger different responses in different parts of the body too. So they found other cancers, but it was primarily breast cancer. And this almost, like, you can think about, like, as humans, we are a little bit like plants, because our hemoglobin looks like a chlorophyll. Like our hemoglobin is got like this solar panel with iron in the center, where a plant has magnesium in the center. But it's the same function, where light's coming in, we absorb these light frequencies, and we do what we want to with these light frequencies for our processes that we need. And if we're getting weird, strange light frequencies pulsing into our bodies that are artificial, that are in a range that can be damaging, which is like indigo light, blue light, violet light, are very strong, powerful. We're not designed to like be under that weird effect, that pulsed effect from the light. We want that light to come in as smooth, and we want it to come in ideally in the morning. Like there's a lot of blue light when you wake up in the morning that when it hits your skin, it triggers, and through your retina and your eyes, it triggers these different responses to actually make a compound factory of compounds that your bodies need to, you know, do the right things throughout the day. So if you get the cycle down, get the morning sunlight, even get some evening sunlight for more red light exposure, like the sun itself can go a long way to keep you healed if you use it at the right dose size and at the right time of day. And like, you know, like behind me is a fake picture, actually, by the way. This isn't actually snow where I'm at. This is like just a thing here on Google Meet. But like having a big open window like this might look like, hey, I'm getting the sunlight I need like into my house. This is great. And it might be giving you UV, some UV A and some, you know, of the color light that's coming through, but certain glass is even tempered, right? So you might be getting zero UVB light through that window, and UVB in a certain dose size is really good for us a certain time of day, obviously, to generate vitamin D from our cholesterol. So this is what I do. Like I think I've thought about like all the big picture, the interlinking of your health. And that's why I offer like a health service to think about how are we living our lives and what can we do, little hacks, little free things that you can just implement right now to get your overall health feeling like you have more energy, and which you will. Your mitochondria will like gain more energy, thinking about other things as well. Specifically to a person though, there are genetic and epigenetic things that could be happening that could be being triggered on and off based on your environment, based on things in your environment that might not be serving you, that might be bad for your situation, or the opposite, like the good things that your body's taking in. So I think of the approach of like, you know, how a person's living their life, what is a good strategy to actually do for your specific need, because like for me, my genetics, I figured out that I have a blocked glutamate pathway. It takes longer for glutamate to come out of my blood. And that was part of the reason back in 2000 where my eyes were getting bombarded with glutamate sparking tissue damage in my retinal cells. Retina is very sensitive, like one of the most sensitive cells in the body. So it makes a lot of sense that those would be the cells that are first attacked if I'm not treating my body well. And I didn't know at that time I had these, you know, genetic broken pathways, just how I was born. And it takes longer for me to clear out the glutamate. Glutamate turns to GABA, so glutamate's an excitatory molecule where it's supposed to convert to GABA, which is the opposite. It's not excitatory at all. It actually like calms and chills you out. Like if you were to buy GABA, like for a supplement at the store kind of thing. So the GABA, for me to make GABA is more difficult. For another person, it might be totally fine and they have no glutamate problems at all. They can eat as much Chinese food as they want and they don't get any problems, right? For me, if I were to do that, it's like, it's a world of hurt. And like, there's a certain point at which something excitatory becomes inflammatory as well. And this is like talking about like what could be coming into the diet, what can be coming in from your environment you're living in, what could be your background of your mind. Like, I really want to think about how your mitochondrial complexes are working, because that's the basis of your health. People rarely say that. It's like if your mitochondria are not functioning properly, if they're not generating the energy they should at a smooth, really high rate, then once the mitochondria in a cell starts to comes down like 20, 30%, that causes the cell to turn on other gene expressions to make the cell survive. So the cell doesn't just crash when it runs out of energy. And when these other programs come on, these are called usually AIs. They're actually like autoimmune diseases. And all these modern diseases that we're getting in our society are typically because the mitochondrial energy generation is not up to the level of what it should be. So working on the mitochondria and making the mitochondria healthy is like the fundamental root strategy to get your overall health higher. And there's a lot of simple things that can be done that are free. Again, you live a certain way, you can slowly over time get your mitochondrial energy to start cranking up in your body. And this is interwoven with how your EMF, how your own internal electromagnetism works in your body. This has to do like with some of like Jill's stuff, like with how what's your chakras doing, right? Like some chakras might be working great and other ones are just like, you know, energy's not doing what it should be, and then your whole energy field is disturbed because you have some weak links in there. So I think and to me, this is where the science kind of merges into what you guys do at Karmik Channel, what we all do at Karmik Channels is with the energy generation, like your mitochondria literally and your gut biome is literally making the energy for your body. And this is powering up these other systems like your chakras. It's powering up your biofield to have a strong biofield, especially in this day and age. I also think I'm also another kind of tinker hobby of mine is I'm into a lot of astronomy. So I think about what the sun does, like with coronal mass ejections, you know, when it hits the planet and it creates the northern lights and the auroras. And during this time of turbulence, when Earth itself is hit, in the science, it shows for no doubt, like there's all kinds of neurological issues, all these other problems that show up in humans and all of life when the planet is like also disturbed, energy disturbed. So part of like your own field, like your aura field helps, like if you have a strong field and we're hit from an outside source, like from the sun, and we have a huge CME hit the planet, like if you have a strong energy field, your energy field should be very like much like a shield against what's coming in too. And you'll just like be able to like weather the storm better. So that's why building the mitochondrial health is like core. This is also why I do like a screen weaning service as well for the kids. The kids are extremely sensitive. Like they're the most sensitive of all. Like they're growing their biology, their neurons. They don't have the myelin sheaths in their on their neurons, which is like the insulation over a wire. So they're like exposed to like everything we throw at them emotionally. If we throw something at them, like with a food, like especially like red dye 40. Most people know red dye 40 is a excitotoxin. Like if you take too much glutamate at once. So a kid taking red dye 40, boom, like they're like all shaken up, and you can tell their behavior changes. A lot of things change with them because they are just more sensitive beings because they haven't like developed and built all this shielding around them like we have as adults. So this, you know, this just goes into like, okay, well, what can you do now where you're at, your current situation, to build your biology, you know, to a better point where you can start resisting these things. And having a kid in front of a screen for like without breaks, like just constantly 24/7, not only all the psychological issues that go with it, but the biological issues of the screen itself, if it's mitigated or not, and the frequencies coming off the screen, if they might be too close to the computer that's down on the ground near them, like all the technology they're around can help like foster like dopaminergic pathways in their bodies to keep them in a loop. So a lot of times, you know, you get this, like you get a kid in front of a screen for an hour and you ask them, hey, it's about time to get off. They're pretty much like a zombie in front of the screen because their dopamine levels are telling them, I want to go to the next reward on screen that I see. And then all the energy around them is like making them stuck. It's sticking them to the screen in front of them too. And without the proper back and forth, where like, okay, you're going to be on the screen for, I'll give it a half hour, an hour, then get off the screen, go get some motion in, you know, get some movement, come back later, we'll talk about it. And then after dark, like after the sun sets, minimizing that screen time goes a long way. Like the more time you give them closer to bedtime, the more they're going to be agitated, the more they're crashing their melatonin, which they're not going to be healing properly. They'll usually sleep in later because they have the lack of melatonin. When they wake up, they're usually tired for the first half hour. They're not chipper. Like, you can see how the behavior changes, just like if you have them properly on the screen at a certain time. And then with a lot of kids today, they're just addicted. So half of the battle is figuring out how to get them off of the addiction and into a different pattern and a different way where they consume the technology, so the technology is not harmful to them. So I've had a couple sessions with people on this, which has gone really well too. And I have had multiple kids in my life for the last 20 years, and I've seen it all firsthand. As a video game designer, right? Like, I'm also thinking about, am I making a product that's harmful to kids, right? And how do I go about trying to convince the higher ups to minimize some of the addiction in the games and all this stuff, right? So, and it's a real deal. And people with ethics in any company will start hearing it and trying to design in ways where it's not as problematic, but it's always going to be a problem until you get rid of a screen, because the screen itself has an EMF field that comes off of it. Back in the day, like, the CRTs were really bad. They had really high frequency damage particles that would come off the screens. Today, our modern screens are not as bad as it was. They're still not healthy. So like, like, for instance, I use a program called FLX that blocks the blue light and turns the screen more amber. I told Pam about that in our last session. But like, that's just like one little hack, but it's also about the consumption time, giving yourself breaks and just living a certain way where you give your body time to recover from the damage you're receiving. Like, we're all receiving, like, you can think about it that way. We're all receiving damage because that's just part of our existence. And then, are we allowing our bodies to get back into a state, allowing it to heal? And if you have followed enough of the modern, like, more natural medicine pathways, like, you've probably heard about, like, sympathetic dominance, parasympathetic structure in your body, where one's a more fight or flight state, closer to a fight or flight, where you're more like agitated, you become more analytical, your emotions kind of turn off, you can be more like, just like, I need to survive in this world with this screen in front of me, versus like a parasympathetic state where you're more relaxed, you're more chilled out, you're like having fun, like emotions are coming in, you're able to have emotional intelligence around those emotions. That state of calm is where you want to be, like at a French restaurant eating your food, because if you're having a nice conversation with somebody chilled out, the digestion processes, your gut biome and how your all your digestion works, that food is going to be more useful to you and it will be more healing to you. If you're in front of the computer watching a video that's screaming at you and you're chowing down food, you're probably not even thinking about your food. The food that's going in isn't really, like, your body's tensed up. It's not digesting in the way where it's able to like take it in and like heal your body as good as it should. So this is why, like, as we know, like, circadian rhythm, again, you go back to circadian rhythm, when you go to sleep, you want to like kind of prep the night as each hour goes on right before bed, where you start getting into a more relaxed, chill state. You might think about like your grandmother turning off one light over here and kind of dimming the house for the next hour, and then coming over here and like, just doing different behaviors where things just start slowing down in the last couple of hours before you go to sleep. And that helps your body get into, when you sleep, a deeper REM sleep. There's 4 stages of sleep. It will get you deeper into that stage 3 and stage 4. And when you get down into those stages, because of your brainwave activity, it's been shown that this is where your healing, like all kinds of healing, like kicks in. And there's different kinds of healing depending on what tissue type you're talking about. If you're talking about brain tissue versus liver tissue, it's like night and day, like what mechanisms need to be activated to purge out the amyloid plaque tissue right in your brain versus what might be going on in your liver. And if you go to bed late at night, like, your liver becomes active. It's like the second sun in your body. It like turns back on to like keep you going at night. So you overstress your liver if you also don't have this process in the evening where you kind of like calm down and start trying to get things to slow down and for ultimate healing, because your liver, right, needs to be it's cranking out all these compounds for you. Like it makes glucose when your glucose gets too low for your bloodstream. So like if you're living a certain way, things will just naturally come into alignment and you'll feel better. So yeah, for screen weaning, that's another service, like I said, that, you know, I go into. I think about like all these ways to get your child living a certain way where they feel like they're consuming the computer at the right period of time. I don't have the impression, I don't like to say like you get zero computer. I like to say like anything in life can be addictive, anything can be a tool. So I think of a computer kind of like in those ways where like you learn to like use this tool a certain way for a certain function and not use it as a means of escape, right? Like a lot of kids do. So, you know, I try to teach those things where to the parents. So it's a lot of like a lot of times I'll have a screening meeting session and one of the parents will be like, I want him to have zero computer time, which is, you know, she knows, like the mom might know that's maybe healthy to do. Maybe we do go on a complete tech fast for like 4, 5, 6 days. And typically the father will be like, no, there's nothing wrong with the computer. I think you're kind of like a little bit woo, woo, woo out there, right? So it's a matter of like finding good synergy, like with the parents usually with finding what works and then trying to stick to that pattern is the hardest thing, because you can have designed it all out on paper or in your mind and think this will be the thing that the kids, it'll work with the kids. But then the parents at the end of the day have to like enforce that in a nice way, of course. Like they have to like set the ground rules and the guidelines for the kids, allow the kids to fail. And when the kids fail, you know, tell them why they failed in a nice way and get them like slowly over the course of several weeks to a point where their whole behaviors have kind of changed out from under them and they don't realize that's changed that much. Like one thing we're doing here at the house today, we have an 11-year-old and a 7-year-old in the house. And for some reason, like I have a timer on my computer that just auto shuts down the computer. So if they happen to be on the computer and a certain time rolls around, the computer's just done. And they're like, oh, like, okay, then they usually figure out something else to do. And because we as a parent didn't tell them like, okay, we're about to shut down the computer, temper tantrum, right? Like that doesn't happen. The computer is the thing that shut down. It takes the parents out of their mind. Like the parents didn't shut it down, the computer just shut off. So it's like a nice way of like these little tiny strategies are nice ways to get the kids that might have addiction problems to not just completely melt down when something happens like that. And so what I'm doing now, because, you know, we're going into winter, like I'm going to like I'll have the computer on. Let's say the computer will shut down at 9:30 at night. Then what I'll do is like 4 days later, I'll have it shut down at 9:15 at night. Another 4 days later, then I'll have it shut down at 9 o'clock at night. And they don't realize when the computer, they don't look specifically at the time. So they just feel like it's the right time it's shutting down. So by the time we get into like, you know, summer or winter solstice, the computer's shutting down like at 7:45 at night and they don't think anything of it. And then it gives them a time like an hour or two before sleep to do whatever they need to do to wind down for the night. And then they also sleep better and they go to sleep earlier, which is super useful. Like that, I think that's another problem we're all facing, that a lot of kids will stay up late and it will feel like they have ADHD. They'll be like on end doing things right up until bedtime and they'll never want to go to sleep. They always want to have fun, or they always want to like be playing. They always want to do something. And that extra energy oftentimes is an indicator they've had too much screen time and they haven't had enough outdoor time to actually like burn off some of that energy, because they're rapidly growing little kids compared to adults, right? So yeah, I think I talk through all this with parents that have screen issues with their kids, and that can be a really easy thing to fix. But like there's a lot, like I have a laundry list of like 20 guidelines that if you kind of stick to it over the course of several weeks, usually with a lot of different kinds of kids, like every kid's different too, right? So like I have to talk through the needs of every kid, and where they're at, what they're doing, because it can be night and day with each kid on the approach that might need to be made, because you try one approach, that kid completely resists against another approach. The kid's like, oh, okay, that's, they'll go with it. The last service I offer, which I haven't gotten any people yet, but I call it trauma identification. So I've had a lot of just general relationship issues with emotions over the last forever, right?
Scott, I think your microphone muted.
I don't know how that happened. That's interesting. So I have this thing called like trauma identification, and where a lot of things what everyone's been experiencing really for the last 10 years, like in the last 10, 20 years specific, feeling like in my life, is this kind of like this role reversal in relationships, or this weird dynamics that like come about in relationships with our emotions. So part of this trauma identification that I talk about, really, like I have conversations with people back and forth about like, well, let's look at where we might be wounded in our unconscious or subconscious states, what happened in our past, how that's influencing our relationships today in ways, because a lot of times we cope with things just in different ways altogether. And some of the coping strategies we learned from a previous trauma may actually be serving us really good, and we're integrating it really well. And we're able to like think about our traumas and feel through that past trauma to feel like, okay, I feel like maybe I've resolved this or integrated it and it feels okay. But the coping strategies around it might need to actually be thought about, reconsidered, especially with dynamics with, really the root is back to your mother and father or your caretakers when you're earlier in life. Feel like, what did I learn from them? What did I pass down from a child into my current state? And emotionally, when I come into this present moment, am I able to see how it's coming in, right? And identifying like, what are these triggers happening to me as I'm coming into these states? So I guess a good example to just talk about a little bit is, I think of like 3 stages of life through your childhood. The first 7 years, you're kind of like a parrot, a mimicker. You see things all around you in your environment, and you're like pulling them into you, and you're like replicating them. And you're being this like, I see my mom yell. That means later on in life, I'm going to yell at the situation, right? Or maybe I see my dad working in the tool shed, and he's working and he's building this great thing, and this amazing thing happened to our family. Then later in life, you're like, I feel like I need to go do some carpentry work and make things and be in the tool shed. Like this replication time of our life did have an influence in seeing kind of where the patterns come from and what motivates us, our core desires. A lot of it has to do with like how we might have an influence. And if we're able to be, like to see where we're at when some of these feelings and emotions pop up, then this is where like I talk about, well, what's happening like in relationships. I had this woman contact me, it's about 3 months ago, and she had issues with her boyfriend where she was just very candid, and she's like, I'm being triggered. Like he'll say some things, like I just raged on him. And she realized that it was not right that she raged on him. And she said, I'm sorry for doing this and all this. And he took it passive aggressively. And then he broke it off with her because he realized her rage triggered something in him as well. And it just like created the whole relationship to crumble. And so she came to me just asking me, like, I see you posting a lot of stuff about relationship stuff. Like, what is it I could do? Well, a lot of this has to do with like, are we truly in our core need and desires internally in our masculine and our feminine? Now, when I say that, me as a male, I have a masculine and a feminine in me. It's not that I only have a masculine. We all have parts of ourselves that we have gotten from our mother and our father, these sources in the past. And we're thinking through like, how do we like resolve these wounds? Well, for her, it was like a masculine wound. It felt like, and I talked through with her about like, well, here's different strategies we can do in these situations. But a lot of it's like in the moment of the trigger, how do you stop that situation? How do you look at yourself and say, well, okay, I realize I'm being triggered, pull back into a different state of mind to like think about what are different solutions, what are different ways I have to cope with this feeling that's coming in, because half the times feelings coming in are illusions. They're not actually like real to the moment of the situation. Others things can be reality, but how we respond to it rather than how we react to it can be completely, that's what emotional intelligence is like in the moment feeling I can have daggers thrown at me and my emotions that come out of that, I'm in control of my emotions. How do I get in control of the emotions? How do I not react to the situation and find different coping mechanisms? And is it warranted? It's you don't want to deny emotions at all either. So it's like, if I have anger, I can have anger, but I don't have to like be like, rah, like the Hulk, like throwing out my anger upon everyone. I can do it in different ways. So the trauma identification is like talking through how we could find different strategies in different situations to identify those triggers and to identify what dynamics might be happening in the relationship as to why a stuckness, right, happens, and a feeling of like, I'm not able to be, I don't have really ultimately it's the freedom I have to be who I want to be as a person in that moment. So I guess that's a good definition of where I'm at, what I'm thinking about all this. Like I'm a lot of people, have said like, Scott, you're kind of like a jack of all trades. It's like I hit different places in my life because I'm doing video games, I've done biology, I'm into like looking into all these different circles in this way and that way. So I typically can help guide toward a different pathway because I've had enough experience living life, I guess, in doing that. Like a lot of people also say like, you're so young, how do you know all this? I'm like, I'm not young, I'm 53 years old. Right? Like most people think I'm like in my late 30s or early 40s, but no, it's like I've been through 2 marriages and like I have a new relationship that's wonderful I have a new baby girl, she's 4 months old. There's like, I have a lot of things I'm juggling all the time, which is like, I've gotten used to being like, okay, you can be under the gun, having all these things happening to you. And I'm like, all right, well, still like, we'll take it step by step and go through it and everything will work out. Like, yeah, it can be challenging just with everything going on, but it's what it is and it's life. So I guess like, if there's specific questions you have about, especially like any of this, like health, EMF, like if you have kids in your life and you're trying to figure out how to get them off screen, like whatever you guys, whatever challenges you guys are facing, just go ahead and think about and see if there's maybe any alignment there where I could also help you with what's going on. You're all muted at the moment.
Does anyone have any questions?
Okay, I do.
Hi.
Hi. It's me and my cats. I'm a cat lady.
Yes, I have a cat too.
I have a question about, what are, without giving every trick of your trade away with trauma, dealing with trauma. I'm working through a lot of that right now, and like it's really messing up my sleep, messing up my appetite, and I'm trying to identify ways to bring up stuff. Like I'm dealing with a lot of stuff with my mom, my past with my mom and dad, and healing, and how do you get to the core of healing that and bringing that to the surface? I don't, because
that's quite a challenge, especially if it's a deeper, more like into like a trauma that's way back in there, and you feel like, you can kind of feel the pressure of it coming up from time to time. or we like suppress it back down. But if you're able to feel through it, and like I would say first and foremost, I like to go and lower the frequency to get into where it might be living. A lot of the traumas I figured out like two or three major ones in the past couple of years, actually. And how I did it was I literally had to go into solitude. I went into alone time, and I went into nature, like getting outside and then coming back in, listening to certain music too. Somehow, like, like different tones, different frequencies, sound frequencies can sometimes just get the mind, because like these are emotions, these are stuck emotions, right? So this is why people talk about yoga, because a lot of these traumas are stored all throughout your body in different muscular places as well. It's like there's an integration. Like if you look at biofield resonance tuning, which is a whole other like thing that seems to be interesting. There's also like maybe in our field around us, there could be also stuck things in the field itself. And that's why people use tuning forks, like to like put a tuning fork at a certain place on the body could just suddenly open up a memory and then get you into an emotional state about that memory and be like, oh, okay, I might not remember the whole situation, but I remember what I was feeling. The feeling is the important part. And think about why that feeling is coming through, and then figuring out, like, if you could see, if the more you see and become understanding what that feeling is and how it's bubbling up, oftentimes you feel a sense of closure. Like the sense of closure can come about. And then like with me on a couple of the traumas I've thought about, like the traumas, I know I've kind of invented a thought or a memory about the trauma that might have been different than how it really originally played out. Because if it's a really hard trauma, I mean, it's being buried deep down for survival, right? It's like for your own survival. So
see,
kind
a
of
lot
like
of my
letting,
stuff, I don't remember a lot of my stuff. Like I
right.
don't remember a good portion of high school. You
Yeah.
know, and I mean, I went to a reunion, like my 30th reunion, and everyone's like, I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't remember that. Like, really? We did that? You know? So yeah,
Yeah.
mm,
Yeah. I mean, it's all there. Like your
yeah.
subconscious is recording everything. So the subconscious is living on a different, lower frequency. And this is why, like, I don't do yoga, but like it's interesting. If I exhaust my body, if I like do anything exhausting, like I go out and play some soccer, and then I come back into solitude, I play like very, very even tones. I like actually even make sure I'm in a low EMF space, so other frequencies are not interfering with what I'm trying to dive into. And then not being afraid to, like, whatever comes up, like let it come up. Don't hold it back. Like let it come up and pour out. And some of the harsh ones I've had, like I've had to let it pour out for like a day. Like it just harshly pour out of me, and just whatever I'm feeling, just let it come out. And then you might be able to then, once it's out, kind of like uncorking a bottle, then have a better vision and seeing deeper into why it existed in the first place. So that's part of it. The other part of it to me is also like understanding we do have a wound, and then thinking about, okay, when the wound comes up, what happens to me? How am I being triggered with the wound? And thinking of other things that could replace the wound. Every time the wound comes up, think of something wonderful, like being grateful for seeing your child running when you were young in a play yard, or whatever memory brought up some really powerful, beautiful, amazing thought to you. That's what I like to do too. If I can't figure out the wound and it's not like it's just stuck down there, then when I feel it's coming up, I then, like, if I'm conscious in that moment, think about, how do I replace this? Or even like like I'm an Aries by nature, like astrology wise. So I also think about how do I burn up the wound, right? Like if I
Yeah.
feel this bad thing coming up, maybe I can visualize this. I feel this emotion. I turn the emotion to a physical object. I turn it into some big, I don't know, like iron statue. And then I heat up that statue in my mind, and then I just melt the statue in front of me. Like every time that emotion comes up, that emotion's not serving me. And I feel like it's triggering me. Like
Yeah, I mean,
having
because I did like past life regression because I thought it might have been imprinted trauma
might have been.
from a couple, like, I just don't know what it is. All I know is there's a response that happens that, and it's like, where did it come from? Like, why
Right.
why do I feel icky? Why is this not comfortable anymore?
Yeah.
My solitude is the 70s music. I love Fogelberg. I go back and disco. I'm a disco. I love disco. So I
Mhm.
do listen to that and bring myself into a happy space in the morning. But I'm just at a point where I'm trying to recognize trauma and like my responses. I'm almost tempted to see a hypnotist just to see what happens. So I don't
Yeah.
know. I appreciate your
Yeah.
time. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah. Like you got it right on board. Like how you can figure out how to unstick what's there. And then once it gets unstuck and you feel like, oh, I can see it, you see it from a different angle, then you're able to process. This is why like ketamine treatment is a big thing that's happened in the last 5 or 10 years,
What
because
does that mean?
ketamine is, like the street drug. What's it called? I can't remember offhand, but it's like they have it controlled. It's not that harmful, but what it does is it separates your prefrontal lobe from the rest of your brain when you're on it. So you're almost like, I've never done ketamine, but like what people say is it feels like you're seeing yourself from a whole different perspective when you're
Oh,
actively on ketamine. Yeah. So like you're looking down on yourself and seeing yourself from what you were at this different
like an out
angle.
of body experience?
A little bit like that. And
Oh,
then usually the next 2, 3, 4 weeks after that ketamine treatment, you try to like go into thinking about what you felt like in that experience of seeing yourself from a different perspective. And oftentimes the perspective change alone can get the trauma not as strong or help resolve the trauma in unique different ways. So this is why like the U.S. military has been using ketamine treatments for survivors of war in their own PS,
yep.
post-traumatic stress disorder. So they're using, but it's usually not like supervised. They just give the ketamine and let the person be like, they get this
Figure it
experience,
out.
but yeah, it might not help them at all because
No.
you're not being guided by somebody to help you like talk about the experience that you're doing. And it can be dangerous too, right? Because like in some people, if they have so much trauma and you open that up, the floodgates can be so crazy, right? Like they might want to harm themselves, or like who knows what can come out of that too, right?
Yeah.
So
Kind of
it's
like
it's it's a big deal, like trying to resolve all these things that are shunted in us, because some of the underlying issues of our health, our physical health, might simply just be that stuck trauma, like why a person has an eating disorder or why certain things are happening, right? Like trauma relief is fundamentally tied to like health and biology, everything. It should not be minimized in any way.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay, thanks.
sure.
Just real quick, I was going to say that ketamine treatment sounds similar to those people that have had experiences with psychedelics.
Same.
And that
Yeah.
too, it does help to get advice from someone who has a lot of experience with psychedelics, and kind of understands how they work and what they bring up. But just real quick, I don't mean to interject on Scott's thing, but one thing that can help, Lisa, because I've done this, I have told people that if when stuff comes up, rather than turning and running from feeling the emotion, like for example, if sadness comes up, to cry until you have no tears left to cry.
Right.
That I have found very helpful.
Yeah.
Yep, it's like cleansing. I've been kind of going through that, like my eye and face, everything's so puffy that I've been doing. I'm like, can I like take peyote or something and figure it out? But no, it's been a very healing couple days. Very
Mhm.
traumatic, but healing. My mom's going through some real, I want to say some real inner battles right now, and she's always had mental health issues that have gone undiagnosed. And,
Yeah.
not to get everybody into my personal space, but unless you put it out there, sometimes it doesn't come back and it doesn't get healed. But my mom, my dad waited so long before he finally reached out and indirectly asked for some kind of help. And my mom's like 86 pounds laying in bed, and none of us knew that. They never shared that with us. So it's been a very rough couple days, but it's also brought up a lot of stuff that's gone on between me and my mom too. And you kind of like think in the past all the good, all the bad, and you have this idea of how things should have been, and now I'm looking at, well, how things were, and looking at the good. And that if there's anyone in the family that's geared and kind of has the proper armor to deal with her, it's me, because of everything that I've learned, and my my current position and stuff like that. And so I'm dealing with a lot of that, but I'm also preparing myself to deal with her, because I
Mhm.
have to intervene. I have to do an intervention. So anyway, just putting it out there, healing vibes, please. Thank you.
Okay, for sure. Great.
Does anyone else have any questions, Alicia or Pam?
Yeah, one last ending note. So I like in the last few years, I've recently discovered about myself and my relationship with my mom, and how when I was just like a 10, 11-year old, she was undergoing all these like diagnosis problems, like her health was failing her. She had to have different surgeries, all these things were happening. And my dad was away a lot on business trips. So like I kind of filled in as like, okay, here comes Scott helping out the situation, helping, like being the healer, being the hero almost. And that actually played into a lot of my later relationships in a negative way, because I would be a little more like not seeing the person, feeling like I always had to step in and help them, not giving them their space. Like, a lot of like really subtle, interesting things we did as children can have an influence on how we like address a certain relationship, what we're doing. And it's really important. Like I found like, okay, keep in mind you're dealing with other people with other free will, and you want to like allow them to be who they need to be, because they need to work through their own stuff, right? That's a very important thing I think a lot of parents will go through, even with kids, right? Like how do you like balance this like line between guiding the child in the right direction without exerting enough too much control where you're like altering their free will? Like you have to find this balance. And a lot of times maybe you didn't find the balance, and you have to go back to your child and be like, oh, I'm sorry. Like you apologize to them in a way where they know that, I didn't want to hold you down in this way. Like I really wanted you to be, have your own free will to do what you needed to do for the situation. And I think we do this back and forth at all relationships in our lives. Like if we feel like we want to, there's a little more control coming in, oftentimes is an indicator of what's inside of us, why we're wanting to do that in the first place, right? And a lot of traumas can be sneaky, right? They can be sneaky that way, where they like pop up when you don't expect it, and you suddenly check your own behavior, like, well, why did I do that? Why was I maybe a little over controlling in that situation? And then it can, cascade back down to like, oh, because I had that behavior back as a kid. Okay, and next time this comes up, how do we treat that? How do we catch that behavior so we like allow the right flow to happen? Yeah.
I think a big thing is not being afraid to face the truth, to no matter what, always seek out truth, and then just keep moving forward, even if they're half steps.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yep. Thank you, Alicia. Yeah, we're about to jump to a meeting too. I think Pam,
Yeah.
do you still need to talk, Pam, about stuff at your place? You're muted at the moment. You're still muted. There you go.
Sorry,
you go.
I was muted by Ronald. Is this person Ronald?
No, Mom's Google Meet login. So my name is Jill.
Oh, you're Jill. Yes, I thought maybe you were not Ronald. And,
You know what? I wasn't questioning it. I wasn't going to question it.
yeah, well, it's been very helpful. Yeah, no, it's been a whole hour, and I'm sorry, I was in on the wrong Google Meet that had been sent on an email. So when it got to be the hour, then I thought, well, how come nobody's here? So then I went on to my email and found you. But well, I mean, short story is, I mean, yeah, if you don't have that emotional thing, health, if that's not improving, if you're not feeling hopeful about that, right? And there's been times in my life I have not been hopeful, you know, but if you feel, I mean, and being honest, humility, you know, struggling with my pride, wanting it to be better than it is, you know, but I mean, and just getting older and seeing your parents as fragile and, you know, screwed up just the way you are, you know, it does help to ground you a little bit more. And just I appreciate being able to, I mean, we're in a country where we don't speak the same language, you know, as everybody just about. And so, you know, isolation is a problem. And I mean, we came here for our health, but now we're feeling a bit isolated. Fortunately, my husband and I have each other, and we've got our friends up far away that we talk to online, right? But and we're making some friends here, but you know, it's a whole new thing. But I'm just saying, when you're isolated, you realize again how weak you are, how dependent you are, how you need to have community, you know. And I mean, I just feel with maturity and age comes a little bit of, I'm growing a little bit, you know, because of that, because of my weakness, because of more awareness of my weakness, you know.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know, that's a different, totally, but I appreciate what everybody has said. It's helped me to think about a lot of things. Thank you.
Sure.
Very well stated.
All right.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Pam. And thank you, Lisa.
Jill and Scott. I appreciated that.